Welcome to the Ravi Kodaki Nexus podcast. I'm your host, Ravi Kodaki. And today's guest is someone who has spent decades at the intersection of technology, leadership, and global innovation. Please welcome Srinivas Sampath, Vice President R&D and site leader of Upland Software, a B2B enterprise software company headquartered in Austin, Texas. Over his career, Srinivas has built and led large-scale technology organizations. Before Upland, he held leadership positions at Chorus, Elysian, and SunGuard, to name a few. He has helped organizations scale complex engineering capabilities, build high-performing teams, and navigate the evolving role of global capability centers in the technology ecosystem. Srinivas brings a rare vantage point on these questions, having worked across geographies, cultures, and technology waves. Srinivas, it's a pleasure to have you on the Ravi Pradiki Nexus podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for inviting me on this show. It's a great pleasure to be part of this in a particular podcast and share my views. So thank you for inviting me.
Great, fantastic. So, Srinivas, I would like to begin with my first question to you. How do you perceive yourself as a leader?
Great, Ravi. That's a great place to start. If I look back at my journey over the last 3 decades, I see myself as a leader who primarily focuses on three things, which I feel have helped me stay true to the journey. So the first one is what I called as creating clarity of purpose, which is essentially helping people understand why we exist and what's the primary purpose of us working on the things that we are working on, right? So the primary thing that I always look for is creating that clarity of purpose. The second one is building strong teams. um, I feel very strongly about this because if you don't have the right people doing the things that are required, the rest is all only on paper, right? So you definitely need to focus on building strong teams, and I've always taken that as a personal area that I'm involved in, so that we select and bring on board the right people. Now, once we have the purpose defined and the people identified, the next is really enabling them to do their best work, right? And that primarily comes by asking the right questions, because I feel my role is all about not having all the answers, but be in a position to ask the right questions and then really staying out of the way, right? And making sure that people bring their best foot forward, and contribute across all the areas that we want them to contribute as well. So these would be the three things that I see from myself as a leader. But to stay true to my purpose, personally, I also try to stay curious, which is continue to learn both from the teams that I built and also from the ecosystem, and making sure that I take these best practices back to the teams and also give back to the community.
Brilliant. So, purpose, people, and asking the right questions. Great. So, Srinivas, you had a long journey across several companies here in various capacities. Is there a leadership philosophy that has shaped your approach the most towards success or dealing with failures or people you work with?
I feel across the journey, it's been a mix of all the three, right? Because I strongly believe that the path in a leadership journey is never straight, right? It is filled with ups and downs, and a lot of blind turns. And I think that each success or each failure or the people that you work with has an impact on your philosophy and has an impact on how your journey really looks like, right? So for example, each failure that I've mentioned or I've had in my journey has helped me reflect on what I should refocus on, right? And really understand what are the areas that I need to kind of re-emphasize on. And each success has also reinforced in me what I need to double down on, right? These could be areas that I need to really reinforce. And every person I have met along the way has really helped shape a mental image of myself, right? And reinforce that, so that I know this is something that I can bank on.
Okay. Okay. Great. Fantastic. Very nice to know that, Srinivas. So now just kind of moving on to the next theme of GCCs in a changing world. Uh, you have led several GCCs in very good leadership capacities. What has been your observation on how GCCs have evolved over the past couple of decades, maybe from cost centers to innovation hubs? And where do you see the next phase of GCC evolution?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ravi, because over the last decade, we have seen GCCs really move from cost efficiency centers, to capability and innovation. But I feel the next phase is all about becoming what I call as global decision and product ownership hubs. Right. Today, if you see, India hosts more than 1,700 GCCs, employing more than 2 million professionals. But what is changing now is many of these centers are no longer just supporting global teams. In fact, they're increasingly owning the digital platforms. They're doing a lot of cutting edge work on platforms like AI. They're also owning products and focusing deeply on product development and also enterprise data ecosystems, that power the global business. So what I'm really seeing within the ecosystem is what I look as a smart GCC. Right, these are essentially value creation centers that have a very strategic accountability and influence in areas like AI, cybersecurity, cloud platforms, and products as well. Right, many of these GCCs today are already in this journey, but the real shift is when they start, actively moving from execution engines to becoming, these co-creators. So I'm really, bullish about how this journey is going to, shape up and how GCCs can really play, a very core part in this.
Okay. Okay. So smart GCCs and co-creators are the two themes that I
Right.
gather from this. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Would you like to expand a little bit more about smart GCCs? Smart GCCs. Would you have any advice for somebody who's setting up a GCC now and how they should go about?
I think the idea of using a word called smart, as a prefix to the GCC essentially means that some of the earlier models of setting up a GCC from scratch, going through the process of hiring the people, setting up the teams, working on the product knowledge, and then starting to incrementally build capability and starting to value add. I think that whole journey is now getting compressed, right? Because these days setting up a GCC is a very straightforward process. I've seen instances where GCCs are up and running in less than a month, right? And also hiring people and getting it up and running in terms of an entity is very, very straightforward. Now, where the smart comes in is how you think about the team structure, or how do you think about the operating model. And that's where I feel a technology like AI is really going to play a big part, because now you're no longer thinking about just people, right? You're also thinking about how a technology like AI can short circuit your entire process of development. It can short circuit processes around, let's say, HR, finance, and whatnot. So it's really about how you create this, amalgamation between humans and AI. Right. That's where I feel, the smart part really comes in, because GCC leaders need to clearly think about how to combine these two, rather than you know still being in an older model and trying to bolt these technologies on top, because that's never going to work. You really need to see how to coexist. That's why I think the smart GCC, is a apt nomenclature for how I see this evolution.
Wonderful, wonderful. There are a couple of things I was really impressed when I was reading up your profile, and two things that kind of caught my attention, which I would like to deep dive into. One is that, so first of all, I should congratulate you on Upland winning the best GCC of the year,
Thank you.
2025. So
Thank you.
that's huge. And I also saw that the ENPS is the Employee Net Promoter Score of 90 plus for 2 consecutive years. So those two things are really phenomenal achievement. I would like to probe a little bit into that to help our viewers understand. So, would you like to share a little bit about planned winning the best GCC of the year? What went into that, and what was the criteria, and how did you feel about that?
Sure. So this award was essentially by a company called Zoin Group, and it essentially looked at the practices and the engagement models and the people related areas of any GCC for that matter, right? Now, specifically talking about Upland, we felt it's a great opportunity for us to, think about applying for this, particular award category, because we are slightly different from many of the other GCCs that are out there, right? We are a GCC that is fully remote, right? You don't very often hear a GCC in India that is fully remote. There are few examples, but by and far, the model that many GCCs have adopted, especially after COVID, is one of hybrid. And these days, you see actively GCCs wanting people to get into the office and look at a 3-day, 4-day kind of a model. So when we set up the GCC, we said let's challenge this model, right? Because we wanted to be fully remote, since Upland globally is fully remote as well, right? So we said why not just replicate the entire model, because people already know how to operate in that particular aspect, right? So once we made that decision, a lot of other things had to be relooked at. So especially around people practices, especially around hiring, especially around engagement, and especially around how do you think about communication, right? Because you're not going to keep seeing people day in day out, and you're not going to be watching over their shoulder, right? So it required us to rethink a lot of the mindsets that we are used to, and we had to unlearn a lot of those things. So a big part of my role in the initial days was to help people understand that, look, you have to unlearn many things that you might have done in the past. While COVID did force us to be remote, it was never an operating model, right? Because companies wanted people to get back to work. But if we are going to continue in that journey, then we definitely need to have a different mindset. So we started working on how to redefine our hiring processes, how to redefine our people engagement models. How do we continuously check the pulse of our people? How do we share corporate updates, on a consistent basis to our people who are fully remote? How do we make sure that they have the right setup to be able to be productive? And how do we encourage and motivate and reward people in a model like this? So we came up with practices and experiments along each of these different directions, and started putting together a sort of a handbook that clearly says how do we want to operate in a model like this, right? And once we started executing to that model, there were of course a lot of learnings, there were of course a lot of ups and downs in terms of how we saw that coming together. And that kept us relooking back at the model and improving it. And today I think we have a pretty well oiled machine, I would say, in terms of understanding how do we continue to operate effectively in a remote manner. So when we looked at that story, and we saw this award category, we said it's a great opportunity for us to share this, right? Maybe there are practices that others can learn from us and clearly look at what it means. So that's how we entered into that category. And although we didn't enter with the concept of yes, we will win it, we were surprised when we were called out. And they said that, yeah, this is a very different model of operating, and we would love to really recognize you for that. So we got the award, myself and my HR. We went and got the award. But what was surprising was we told the corporate back that we got this award, and they were really happy that it's something that we made successful over the course of 2 to 3 years. So that's how that whole thing came about. And yeah, thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a definitely very much deserving and needs to be recognized. So I think one thing that you mentioned was that your company is fully remote, and that's simply amazing. And I would like to kind of see if there's any correlation with even with the ENPS of 90 plus along, with that as well along those lines. But before I kind of get into that, working remote has been a huge challenge for many employees. I've seen in other companies. What has been your observation of some of the challenges of people working remotely, especially to build trust among the employees and to meet your objectives? If you could please share a little about that.
Sure. So I keep getting that question a lot, Ravi, in terms of how does one build trust in a model like this? How do you ensure that your values are being understood by our people and whatnot, right? So the way we approach this entire thing is we said if there is one thing we have to do really well in a remote first model is we have to communicate and probably even over communicate, right? It is to make sure that people have sufficient information in terms of understanding what is going on, either at the company level, either at the team level, or at an individual level, and continue to reiterate it on a consistent basis. So we said communication is going to be, super important as an underlying mechanism if we have to be successful in a remote model. The second thing that we started emphasizing is from a work aspect, right? We said work cannot be very, very fragmented if you're going to be fully remote, right? You need to be able to think about how do we look at work from a largely self-contained manner, so that if somebody gets a piece of area that he or she needs to work on, they should be able to independently work on it without having to keep constantly chatting with something to figure out what needs to be done, right? It's also focusing a little bit on the autonomy part, right? How much autonomous can I be in my work? So that helps me be pretty much in my zone and really start contributing to it. The third is, we also made sure that, teams have flexibility in deciding how they want to operate on a given day, right? We never insisted on a start time. We never insisted on an end time, right? We said if you all feel that, midday, 11 o'clock is when you're all very productive, so be it, right? So you can start your day at that point of time and you can figure out at what point of time you want to end your day, because there could be interactions that you will have with people when in other parts of the world. So we also gave them flexibility in terms of how they want to operate. So once we started focusing on these areas of autonomy and flexibility and really giving them the right mechanism to be fully remote, obviously from a let's say from an infrastructure point of view, we had to ensure that people had all the right setup, right, to be able to be productive and not really have struggles in terms of being able to be continuously working. So that is something that we made sure we set as an expectation. And the fourth thing is we really told our people, look, as a company, one of our operating model is we're not going to breathe down your back, right? We know you're a mature person, and hopefully you don't need consistent hand holding. And if you say you were going to do something, let's say you commit to something, we expect you to stay true to that commitment, right? Because nobody is watching you, right? So the trust, was basically built by giving them that autonomy, giving them that freedom, right? And in my mind, Ravi, trust is essentially what you observe as behaviors in people, right? If 10 people reiterate the same thing over and over and again, that becomes your culture, and that's how people say that, okay, if this is what I have to do here, this is what I need to do to build trust, right? So we focused on what should be those characteristics that we have to continuously reiterate, so that people feel safe in an environment like ours. And that boiled down to, these four things that I mentioned, right? Accountability, giving them that freedom, staying out of their back, and making sure that work is, self-contained and somebody is not constantly monitoring, right? So once we started doing that, people realized the flexibility that they have, and we've seen some amazing performances, right? People have really stepped up, and because they knew that we were not watching them all the time, right? So it also gave them a little bit of freedom. And we've seen some amazing people come through the door, and some of them have even won the most prestigious award in Upland, which we call as the Blue Cape Award, which is given to 1% of the global workforce. And we've had people for the last 2 years win that as well. So I think it's about how you rethink your people culture, and how much of it you really want to let go versus carrying over some old practices that worked well in an in-person model but will not work in a remote model.
Excellent, excellent. Some fantastic learnings there. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Trust is key, and you're building a culture where people can trust each other. And the idea about giving them autonomy, allowing them to work with freedom and with purpose, I think that kind of really makes a lot of difference there.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is just kind of zooming out is how should GCC leaders build trust with headquarters to gain strategic influence?
Right. I briefly talked about it from an Upland standpoint. But if I look at it across any GCC for that matter, Trust, like I said, is about one, making sure that people see consistent behaviors in you, so that they can know that this is what is expected in this company, and most importantly also staying true to what you commit to, right? And in the context of a GCC, it's all about consistent delivery of business outcomes, right? If you're consistently doing what you say you will do, trust slowly starts increasing, right? And the way I see trust in itself, I see trust as a maturity curve, right? It's not something that is constant throughout. And in fact, in a journey of a GCC, which we normally show it as a maturity curve, you can actually superimpose trust itself as a curve on top of that. So I see trust as five stages. One, what I called as the reliability stage, where I think the HQ is really looking at, can I depend on you? Right, that's the first stage. And in that stage, there are certain characteristics that you need to exhibit as a GCC, which is you be consistent in your delivery, you show process maturity, you show strong governance, and you basically avoid surprises, right? So that's your first stage. Now, once you cross that stage, you move into what is called as the capability stage, which is the HQ now realizes, okay, you're good in this, right? And at that point of time, trust is really built around you having strong, engineering or domain capability. There is talent depth, and you're able to improvise on solutions, right? So then the trust increases a little bit more. Now, the third stage is what I called as the ownership stage, where the HQ says, now that you've shown me that you're good in something, I believe you can run this, right? And that's where you start taking on product ownership, platform ownership. There is better decision making, and there is ability to do trade-offs, and you're able to start delivering much better business outcomes, right? And the last two stages are what I call as innovation stage and partner stage, which is essentially you're helping the HQ realize their digitization journey, and you're starting to co-create the future, right? And that's where innovation comes in. Your ability to work on newer technologies and see their applicability comes in. It talks about how leadership participates in the global goal setting. It's about how talent shows leadership across different areas. So I see this as a curve, right? And throughout this curve, what is very important for a GCC leader is to focus on proactive partnerships, transparency, and alignment with global stakeholders. Because once you start doing this consistently, moving through the curve is fairly straightforward. It all boils down to capability and how you start, executing to it. It's never about positioning, right? GCC leaders should really think about trust as a behavior, right? It's not a positioning model, right? So once I think you start reinforcing, these aspects that I talked about, which is partnership, transparency, alignment, and look at it as a maturity curve. I think trust slowly starts increasing, and before you know it, you're definitely having a seat at the table and actively contributing.
It's a brilliant framework, Srinivas. That's fantastic. So just recapping, got reliability, capability. Third is ownership. And fourth is innovation and partnership built on a foundation. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay. So my next question is, if somebody were to be running a high performance team and a GCC like this, what leadership skills would be required or would be expected from these leaders?
Right. Again, that's an interesting question, Ravi, because I've realized that there is no one set of bullet points that you can follow, and expect success. A lot of it depends on the individual. A lot of it depends on the context, and a lot of it depends on how you react, and focus on different situations. So the best way for me to answer this question will be, let me share what has helped in my journey, right? Which we can call as some traits that people can use to become successful GCC leaders, right? So the first is what I call as leading with context. I spoke about it in the very beginning, when we talked about what defines me as a leader, right? Leading with context, I feel, is extremely important, because we have to explain the why at any given point in time and provide as much context as possible. So when people understand the overall landscape, trust definitely grows, right? Because they know that they have the right information with them. The second is, making ownership explicit, right? And what this definitely mean, or what this means is people clearly understand what they own, and how they operate, right? While there can definitely be some occasional ambiguity, being able to help clarify ownership goes a long way, right? I've seen too many instances where a lack of ownership just leads to, you know, finger pointing, and nothing really gets done, right? So making ownership explicitly clearly says who's going to be ultimately responsible for getting something done. That's the second one. The third is, while every GCC or its headquarters has a brand, from a GCC perspective, it's very important to build a local value proposition, right? And this is very critical if you want to attract the right people. And the GCC leader plays a very important role in defining this value proposition, right? So while it's very critical to align with a global value proposition, there definitely needs to be a local one, right? Because cultures are different, local nuances are different, people expectations are different. So you have to take the global EVP and tweak it to be something that's very unique to yours, right? And this can ideally be done, by the GCC leader, being really involved in defining that value proposition, because they have to believe in it first to expect others to believe in it, right? And the last is clearly, indexing on open communication, right? And this I spoke about it in the context of Upland as well, where all of us are remote, right? So focusing on communication and not really micromanagement is something that we have systematically worked on and made sure that people at any point of time understand what's going on, and there is easy way for them to reach out and get additional information. So keeping that communication channels open and alive all the time is again something that I've seen really work well in the context of a GCC. To answer your question, the traits that I feel are important are these four that have really worked for me, and I'm sure they will probably align with a lot of the other GCC.
Okay. That was very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. So now, moving on to the next theme, we'll talk about leading in the age of AI. And before I jump into this, Srinivas, if you could share a little bit about Upland software. What does Upland do? And maybe also take the opportunity to talk about how you're using AI within Upland and for your customers.
So Upland is an enterprise software company that focuses on AI-enabled content and knowledge management solutions. Right. Over the course of the last decade or so, Upland had multiple products in its portfolio, but we have sort of started narrowing our focus on these two areas because we feel that it's a big area of growth in the future and area where AI can really play a big part, right? So we said the two main areas that we will double down are content and knowledge management. And there are products that we have that actively focus on surfacing knowledge, surfacing content, and let's say even pushing content through the organizational workflows, through an AI enabled product portfolio, right? So that's our primary focus. And within these product portfolios, over the last, I should say, 12 to 18 months, we have actively started focusing on how AI can play a part. Right now, when I talk about AI in the context of Upland, there are two dimensions to it. One is infusing AI into the product, right? So that end customer starts seeing additional benefits of AI being within the product. So that's one aspect of it. The second is how do we use AI internally for our own productivity, right? For our own improvement areas, right? So I would say maybe 12 months ago or so, the focus was more on the first part, which is how do we get AI infused into the products. So each product was asked to come up with a very clear roadmap that talks about how they will infuse AI into their features and functions. And that was then taken, analyzed by a group of people whom we call as AI Council, and they vetted it and they said, yes, these could definitely be done, or this needs a little bit more refinement and so on, right? So that's how we kind of started looking at infusing AI. Last year we took a big undertaking of training globally everybody on the AI tools, right? So that they can start using them more actively in their day-to-day work, and then looking at how we can continuously look at improving the usage of AI tools across each of our people so that they do their jobs better, right? So that's how we started looking at AI in two steps, and trying to see how best it can help in our portfolio. And the journey is not complete. I feel it's an ongoing journey because the tools are changing, the ecosystem is changing. So we're constantly looking at how to double down on the AI usage within our solutions, so that they are much more valuable to the customers.
Okay, got it. Any thoughts, Srinivas, on how an organization can move towards becoming AI first or AI native?
Sure. I think what truly separates companies, that wants to transform with AI, from those who merely experiment with it, is whether they are looking at AI as a technology project or as a business transformation lever, right? It depends on where AI is in your broad scheme of things, right? Now, I believe, or at least I've seen in the race to adopt this technology, many firms are using AI as a bolt on, right? That can give you short term benefits, but it really doesn't give you a lot of long term benefits, because there are several research papers that say that very few companies are seeing an impact on their top line, right, because of AI adoption, right? So the ROI is not very clear. So if the ROI is not clear, then you really need to go back and think, where is AI sitting in your overall thought process, right? So I think the true differentiator comes when you take a step back and reimagine the workflow itself with AI at its core, right? And once you start thinking at that level, a lot of things in and around it also has to change, right? You'll have to think about how teams are being built. You'll have to start thinking about how you can infuse AI into those teams so that you are creating what I call as AI native teams. And you then start thinking about how you can focus on domain experts, and a lot of automation in that entire process. So once you have clarity in your mind on where AI fits into your broad scheme of things, then you can start thinking about some of the other areas that need to come in line, right? Now, without this, if you use it as a tool, that's really not going to help you with anything. It's just a nice demo that you can probably give to people, but it gets killed probably right after that, right? So it's really thinking about where AI fits in your broader enterprise vision, and whether you're going to really use it to transform your business. That's very key.
Got it. You mentioned about AI native teams. Could you talk a little bit about how you're going about structuring these AI native teams, and are you allowing your employees to work with AI agents, and how is that interaction between human and machines going?
Right. So what I mean by AI native teams is you consider AI and its related tool sets as one of the team members, right? And you really surround that with a set of domain experts, AI engineers, and a whole lot of automation, right? So it's essentially embedding AI into your day-to-day workflows that the team goes through, because that's when you can start really thinking about how AI starts playing a role, right? So I think enough research is also indicating that the next phase of enterprise productivity is going to involve these digital co-workers, right? And these are essentially agents that can plan your tasks, that can generate outputs, that can that can interact with different systems, in an autonomous manner, right? So the definition of an AI native team is starting to move away from these rigid functional hierarchies, towards really smaller outcome driven teams that are augmented heavily by AI, so that you see AI as a inherent team member, right? And again, in the context of Upland, we are in that journey, like I mentioned, because with all our people now trained with the AI tools and whatnot, we are trying to understand the level of what I term as AI fluency, right? How much of these tools are being used, right? And what do you really use it for on a day in, day out basis, right? Now, once you understand that, you can try to think about, okay, what more needs to be done to make them AI native, right? Because it's a continuum. I don't see it as a point in time that tells you that you're AI native. It's a continuum because the tools are changing, the methodologies are changing. So you constantly have to keep track of how fluent people are in this technology and keep refining your approach.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, what skills do leaders need to remain relevant in this AI augmented workplace?
Okay, I think that's an interesting question because again, there is no one skill that gets it all done. But I think there are three things that come to my mind, right? The first thing is what I call as AI literacy, right? And this is not necessarily coding, but really understanding what AI can and cannot do, where it creates value, and more importantly, how to ask the right questions, right? Because again, if you look at research done by Harvard Business Review, it clearly shows that leaders who succeed with AI are not those who are technically sound, right? But those who can connect the possibility of AI with real business problems, right? And then look at prioritizing the high impact use cases and ensuring that the talent, the governance, and the data is all aligned so that those solutions can scale, right? So that's what I mean by literacy. It's the ability to connect the dots on where AI can really play an impact on the business problem, right? Now, once that part is done, the second skill is what I call as, being a little bit more human around it, right? Which is evolving your knowledge on systems thinking, allowing people to experiment, being a very experimentative person by nature, and actually orchestrating the talent around it, right? So if you look at an AI augmented workplace and you think about what leaders should be doing in such a workplace on a day in day out basis, they're essentially managing a hybrid team made of humans, AI tools, and AI agents, right? Which means you have to have a mechanism to rapidly experiment. You need to be able to tap into domain experts, product thinkers, engineers, and so on, and try to collaborate very effectively amongst all of them. Right. So that's the systems thinking part. Think about it from a much larger context, right? And allow teams to rapidly experiment, learn from it, and continuously focus on the talent part of it, right? Now, the underlying part when I talk about talent is how do you constantly keep upskilling, right? I mean, how do you keep in touch with what's happening in the areas of AI that you are working on, so that that fluency continues to keep increasing, right? I spoke about this fluency that we are also working on. The idea is to have that understanding and constantly focus on that. And as a leader, drive that upskilling journey throughout in a continuous fashion, right? So I see these three skills, right? One, being very literate in what's happening in the AI space. Two, broadening your thinking to go beyond simple things and start looking at the systems, the experimentation part of it, and finally focusing on the talent, right? How do I upskill and orchestrate talent in this new era, right? That is something that a leader needs to definitely think about.
It's amazing. Excellent framework there for future leaders to look at and to understand. A lot of food for thought. Great. So now, Srinivas, we'll move into the next theme, and it is leading Gen Zs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so every generation has changed the workplace, but Gen Z feels fundamentally different. So, what have you learned about leading and motivating and engaging with Gen Z talent and maybe in Gen Z leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ravi, because I have two Gen Z kids myself, right? So dealing with them on a day in day out basis by itself is very different than how I remember I used to be, treated back in those days. I think it's fundamentally the context in which they have grown up, right? If you look at Gen Zs, this is the first generation that is fully digitally native, right? And they are entering the workforce at a time when there is rapid technological disruption at a scale that we have not seen before, right? So, in such a context, it's very important for us to understand what is this talent really looking for, right? We all know, I think multiple, documents and research papers and whatnot about Gen Zs clearly talk about, three characteristics that, they value, right? So one is the learning velocity. the ability to learn things really quickly and start using it. Two is purpose. They really want to understand why they're doing something that they've been asked to do. And the third one is flexibility, right? Clearly focusing on not a very rigid working model, but having flexibility in terms of how work, gets done, right? Now, if you look at Gen Zs having these three characteristics, and you really double down into it and say, what does it really mean in practice, right? In practice, it essentially means giving clarity, giving regular feedback and constantly looking at growth opportunities, right? How you can enable growth opportunities for these people, right? Because Gen Zs definitely look for faster feedback cycles. They look for opportunities to experiment, and the need to contribute ideas, very pretty early in their careers, right? Something that we've not been used to in the earlier generations, right? So it's clearly thinking about how do you feed into their learning velocity, how do you feed into their purpose, and how do you give them that flexibility so that they're able to rapidly move and grow within, the organizations. Right. So if you have to deal with this generation, I mean, if you have to look at what characteristics will really help, one is focus less on hierarchy and focus more on coaching them. Be transparent because they definitely want to have that understanding of where things are going, and giving them ownership and meaningful problems to solve, right? Because they're looking for growth opportunities, they're looking for contributing ideas, so you need to be able to create that ecosystem that allows them to have that sort of a environment, right? So that's how, I mean, I'm seeing this generation. Obviously, the current context is also having this generation question some of their assumptions, so we'll have to wait and watch, but these things that I talked about really will help.
Got it. Got it. So, what would be the maybe some of the top 3 or 5 skills that you would look for in hiring Gen Z employees or even at a leadership level?
Right. Yeah. So I think for any young engineer who's looking to enter the industry today and wanting to play a part in this current system or ecosystem that we are in, the first mindset that I will look for is this person demonstrating the fact that he or she is a continuous learner, right, rather than a static expert. Now, this is very important because we have seen how technology cycles have rapidly shrunk, right? And we have seen that to kind of survive in this AI era, you will need people who can continuously reskill, and maybe work alongside AI tools and not really fear about them, and apply technology to solve real business problems. So you need somebody who's very adaptable and somebody who's willing to continuously learn and not kind of stick to one lane, right? So I would say I would look for somebody who is shown the capability to master, or at least the ability to focus on multiple things and be in a position to articulate how technology can create value for the business. So that's one fundamental thing, or a skill that I would look for when I'm hiring a Gen Z, right? Now, in terms of their flexibility and in terms of their growth opportunities and whatnot, it can vary from company to company, but clearly rethinking about your ability to show the growth path of for Gen Zs, and how you can really set up an environment for them where they can navigate complex problems and be in a position to accelerate their growth, right? That is something that the leaders have to clearly think about, how to rethink their career pathing, right? Because the past has always been about career ladders, but in the context of Gen Zs, it's all about career lattice. People want to move left, right, up, down, doesn't matter, right? As long as there is growth, there is learning, people want to do that. So clearly relooking at that space is also definitely going to help. And lastly, we have to realize that if you look at the numbers out in the market, Gen Z has got a very low retention rate, right? Their average tenure in an organization is 1 to 2 years. So rather than worrying about how do I retain, you should flip your thinking to say that how do I get value in those 2 years, right? What is it that I can do to really cull out as much as I can And in that context, how does your work model really look like, right? So they know how to use AI. So you have to really think about, okay, can I just pair them, with AI agents and whatnot and get things done, very rapidly, because you don't know when they will find the next shiny object and say, you know what, I want to move on, right? So be open to that mindset versus thinking that, oh, somebody's going to give me 20 years. That's not going to happen. So it's a little bit of a reframing of how we have been used to employee, engagement and even employee retention.
Amazing, amazing. Some very deep insights there, Srinivas. Thank you so much for sharing sharing all that stuff. So, is there one new leadership capability that will define the next generation of CEOs or GCC leaders?
Um, it's not a new, I should say, capability. But if there is one thing that the next generation of CEOs, will need to have is the ability to orchestrate this human and machine intelligence and doing it at scale, right? So as AI becomes embedded across all aspects of an organizational model, right, which is decision making, product development, operations, the primary work of a CEO will be to think less like a traditional company head and more like an architect of a system, right? And where the system is essentially the organization, right? And if you're somebody who can combine technological understanding with the strategic judgment and ethical governance, I think that's going to go a long way. And that's a fundamental skill that I think any new CEO coming into this era will really have to think about, right? So these people have to build AI native organizations. They have to build experimentation driven cultures, and they will have to work with a very very globally distributed team, right? So it's definitely going to be how do you integrate all these three things, right? The only variability now that's coming in is the whole AI aspect, right? How are you going to co-create with AI in this space? So that's going to be very key for CEOs to think about.
That's amazing. Again, love that articulation. So the future leaders will be architect of systems rather than organizations. Okay, brilliant, brilliant, Srinivas. Okay, so I think now we'll kind of move into the last theme. We're going to be asking you some questions that are more personal in nature.
Okay. Okay.
So my first question to you, Srinivas, you have a very uh, very responsible role, and just kind of wondering, how do you take time to de-stress yourself and to kind of carve out moments for reflection or introspection?
Sure, sure. That's a very good question, Ravi. And I think it's usually asked of people who have been in the industry, for many many years, right? So hopefully they have understood what it needs to be de-stressed, right? And hopefully there are practices. So one thing that I do consistently is, I practice a lot of, self-awareness, right? Because that is very very key in this current generation that we are in, where there is a lot of moving parts, right? And if you as an individual are not self-aware, it just leads to unnecessary stress, right? Because you're constantly thinking about, what somebody else is thinking, what somebody else is doing. Am I good? Am I bad? So I think the most important thing that I've learned over these years is, self-awareness, and that has really helped me stay calm, and not really get stressed out, because I feel stress is just a response, from the body to a threat, right? And the most immediate reaction that we will have, because us being humans who have evolved over time, is you immediately react to the threat, in a flight or flight risk, right? So you either want to fight it back or you want to run away from it. But the key thing that you learn through self-reflection or self-awareness is you learn to pause, right? And then you then start thinking about what needs to be done, and then think about what can be learned from that point in time, right? That by itself is one de-stress mechanism, which I actively follow. But outside of that, I'm a very outdoor person, and definitely like my me time. Although sometimes the definition of me time is mostly with my family, which I really enjoy, spending time with. So I love trekking. And any week in the mountains, or a vacation with family with no digital intervention is, my ideal, way to de-stress. And again, on a daily basis, I pause after every 30, 40 minutes of work and, just take a walk around my work desk or just walk up to my family and spend time, right? Sometimes just speaking to my sons gives me a different energy, right? Because I maybe learned something new from them, right? And I just come back refreshed and, have a better clarity of thought. So those are some of the things that I've learned over these years.
Awesome. You mentioned about trekking. Is there one trek that you would like to recommend to our viewers?
God, there are so many. But if I have to pick one from all the ones that I have done, I would definitely recommend the Goichala trek. This is a wonderful 12-day trek, that is done in the Kanchenjunga Park. And the final reward, if I may call it, is watching the sunrise on the K2 mountain at a height of where you view it at a height of from a height of 15,000 feet. So that's, I think, is an amazing experience and a very humbling experience to show that, I mean, you're just a small microcosm in this entire thing, and the beauty around you is so beautiful. So yeah, it would be the Goichal. I really enjoyed that trek.
Lovely. Fantastic. That's really good to know, Srinivas. Do you have any books that you would like to recommend?
Oh, um, if I have to look at recommending a current book, just a few days back, I was introduced to this book by my friend, and this book is called "You Look Like a Thing, and I Love You." Right, and it's about how artificial intelligence works and why it's making the world a weirder place. Right, this is by an author called Janelle Shane, and it's a very great book that talks about how AI works, but she's explained it in a very, very hilarious way, right? And it talks about what are some of the mistakes that AI makes, and how do you kind of work around it. What is it good at? What is it bad at? And initially, when I looked at the title, I was a little surprised as to what's this title all about, right? But then she explains it in the first page that the title came when she asked AI to come up with a pickup line, right? A pickup line is a line that you tell a girl that you want to take her out for a date, right? So she trained AI with some standard pickup lines and said that come out with pickup lines on your own, right? And she gives examples of all nonsense that it put out, but one of them was this line, right? You look like a thing, and I love you. So she took that as the title of the book. It's an amazing book. It's a great read, and for people in this AI age, it's something that is worth spending some time.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I'll definitely check it out. Okay. So it's just one more question about inspiration. Who has been your biggest inspiration over the period of your entire career or your life?
Um, there is never one person who probably embodies all the characteristics that you look for, right? It's probably different people that kind of knock you into shape at different points in time, right? So right from my childhood, it's been my mom who's given me a lot of self confidence, right? She's been a big inspiration for me, and when I started working, my very first boss, I think I have the liberty to take her name. She's Akila Krishna Kumar. She's been a big influence in my life over the years that I've worked with her. From her, I've learned what leadership means. So she's been a big, confidence booster for me. And once I started settling in life and moving on, obviously my wife, she's been a pillar of support. I met her at the workplace and we got married, and then she decided to pursue her own interests. But from her, I've learned, a lot about self-awareness. And why I say self-awareness is she realized that yoga was her calling, so she went and pursued that as a passion. And just seeing her approach her day-to-day life has made me rethink how I should approach mine. Right. So she's been a big source of inspiration for me, and off late, I draw a lot of inspiration from both my sons, right? Being in their Gen Z space, it's just seeing how they think, right? I would never even think like that, back in those days, right? So sometimes just questioning myself on, okay, maybe I have to adapt to this generation, right? So I draw a lot of inspiration from, so both my kids. So different people, I can name many, many more. It's not that, one is better than the other, but um, the best way for you to draw inspiration is to look for experiences, right? And keep learning, keep building. And it's like a building block. It's like a Jenga block. You keep building, right? And you come up with a beautiful structure that's you down the line.
Lovely, lovely, fantastic, amazing. So now we're coming to a close, Srinivas. Do you have any advice for upcoming leaders?
Um, it's not going to be any esoteric word, or it's not going to be like a very deep reflection. But I think the key thing that I would want every leader to understand and be aware of is the world around you is changing, right? And it's changing at a pace that is something that we have not seen before, right? And the most important thing that you as a leader can do in this rapid era is stay relevant, right? And if you have to stay relevant, you have to relentlessly focus on upskilling yourself and understand that you don't have all the answers. So to that end, practice humility, practice empathy, and don't stay rooted in the past, right? I think that's very key, right? Something that worked for you just 10 days ago is wiped out now in terms of how the world is changing. So um, relentlessly focus on upskilling is what I would say. I think that's going to be very, very important, and staying relevant. And lastly, my own personal advice: just take it easy, right? You don't have to. There are only certain things you can control. So focus on what you can control and learn to forget the rest.
Brilliant. So I must thank you for your time, Srinivas, for spending with me on this podcast. I truly enjoyed our conversation. You have shared some brilliant frameworks. There are many frameworks I think that our viewers and listeners will deeply appreciate. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for sharing all the wisdom and insights. It was an absolute pleasure having you on my podcast. Would you like to share anything in closing?
Actually, thank you, Ravi, for inviting me. I know when we spoke just prior to focusing on this podcast, we realized that how many topics both of us have in common, right? So there is so much that I know, we can discuss, we can talk about, we can share and learn from each other, and take it forward. So I thank you for coming into my world. Now you will be one of the Jenga block that I will add to my list, and start learning from. So thank you for the opportunity, and it was great sharing 30 years in 1 hour, right? It's just to kind of really distill those stories. So thank you for that opportunity.
Absolutely. It's an honor, Srinivas. So thank you once again.